I'm going to start with you, Ed. And you have said many times you can ignore 60 to 70% of your vulnerabilities. Where does this come from, and why do you believe that?
We do a series of joint research reports with the Scientia Institute. So Wade Baker, Jay Jacobs, and all those former Verizon DBIR folks. What we did was analyze all of the data, all of the CVEs in the National Vulnerability Database. And then we looked and said, okay, so how many of these either have some sort of weaponized exploit and or that we are actually seeing any sort of successful exploitation activity in the wild for? And that is somewhere between, on any given year, 20 to 25% of vulnerabilities.
If we're not hearing about active exploitation, there's still this idea of a security promise where we expect that our systems have a certain sort of security qualities and that they're reasonably resilient against attack, that the controls we put in place work, and that there aren't flaws in those controls that are bypassable. So it's not only patch these things and ignore everything else, and certainly that wouldn't be what a normative practice would be, but rather prioritize as much as you can towards the things that are under active exploitation. But then once you've done those on an urgent basis, then come back and clean up everything else on a more careful basis.
Question that came in from Richard Yu, who says, prioritization that is risk-based. How best do you sell this to executives who have not yet set a cyber risk appetite?
Part of it is cultural. Part of it is they already get risk-based. They want to do it. They understand the value of it. Even the execs, in some cases, understand the value of that. In fact, sometimes it's the other way around, where the execs are looking to go more risk-based. One of the biggest challenges is the change management around the process. On the ops side, oftentimes it's an easy sell for us, right? We basically say, look, we're going to reduce risk, but in the process of reducing risk, you might actually have to do less work than you're doing now as far as remediation goes.
I think the only time that people tend to get hung up on, Ed, you raised the idea of the compliance check mark, is when you've written your standards to a point that aren't achievable versus saying, hey, my standard is that I will prioritize my efforts towards that which is actively being exploited on the assets that matter most, and then here's what I'll do about everything else. Mm-hmm. And the moment management signs off on that and says, yes, we agree that these are the standards, the auditors, they may have some concerns given, I'll call it doctrine that they're used to. But if this is what management has agreed to and you're living to it, then most of those concerns go away from a regulatory and governance perspective.
Roger Swanson asks a really, really basic question. Can you explain the CVSS or vulnerability scale? What is it? Explain. What makes something a 10? What makes something lower?
Almost everything that you see talked about with CVSS is the base score. It gets conflated with risk. It is not a risk score. It is a severity score. There's a lot of subcomponents that make up the severity of how bad is this vulnerability, right? Is it network accessible? Is it involve information leakage? Is it privilege escalation? Is it remote code execution? All of these different things that feed into just how bad is this vulnerability, which, by the way, also speaks to the fact that why everything skews to the right or the higher end for the base score is because there's very little vulnerabilities that go, oh, this is a good thing, right? In fact, you almost see nothing below a 4 out of 10.
If you go look at first.org, which is the organization that publishes the standard, the math beneath it, there are values in there that have been iterated over time, so let's assume that they're trending towards better. But you have to ask yourself this question, why these values? Are they the correct values? And so there's some math inside CVSS that might say, well, this shouldn't be the only thing that you use to drive your decision making because the math itself is sometimes a bit opaque to, the average security practitioner.
I'm not a fan of the math, but the submetrics that feed into the math, I actually think there's some valuable components within there that you can use as part of your prioritization scheme.
Welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
Make everything a top priority. Now, note that this would completely decimate the whole model of Kenna Security. Why do you want to do this?
If you prioritize everything at the top, then you are absolutely certain that you are not going to miss anything that is important. And there's no way that somebody can come back to you after the fact of the breach that we discussed earlier and say, yeah, but you didn't prioritize that because you prioritized everything.
Yeah, but is it physically possible to get to everything?
We're talking about prioritization, and fixing is somebody else's job.
The one thing I'd ask people to separate when they're thinking about prioritization is the how hard is this to fix conversation? Because that's the feedback loop into your organization around what should we be doing differently from a technology management perspective? That shouldn't be the thing that drives your prioritization questions. This is too hard to do, therefore deprioritize.
Like anything in security, whether it's this or any other topic, I'm a big fan of incremental improvements and baby steps, right? So if you are doing this today, strive to be 10% better tomorrow in 90 days. Strive to be 10% better in 180 days. But always continuously improve, because it's a long journey.